questions?
Longer than short.
Good evening and welcome to the Community and Cultural Committee meeting on Monday the 17th of July. This committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the committee meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting, that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received none. Apologies. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'll move that the committee receive note and accept the apology of committee member Councillor Conn and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
And Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. I'll put that motion. All in favour? On the contrary, the motion is carried. CCC 4, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to move the recommendation that the committee recommends to Council that the minutes of the Community and Cultural Committee meeting held on Monday the 19th of June 2017 at 6:49 p.m. be adopted. Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I have no questions or anyone wishing to debate, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? Contrary, the motion is carried. CCC 5, matters arising. I don't have any indication on the board that there are any, so I'll move on to CCC 6. 6.1, minutes of the Alexandra Park Athletics Complex Advisory Committee meeting. Councillor Mack.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Happy to move that the committee recommends to Council that the minutes recommendations of the following committees be received, noted and accepted. A, the minutes of the Alexandra Park Athletics Complex Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday the 7th of June 2017, and B, the minutes of the Lauren Jackson Sports Centre Advisory Committee meeting held on Wednesday the 28th of June 2017. Thank you.
Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. I don't have any indication of questions or comments, so I'll put the motion that those minutes be received, noted and accepted. All in favour? Against? The motion is carried. CCC 7, officers' reports for consideration. Councillor Mack.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd like to move that the Council recommends to Council that A, the report be received and noted, and B, an additional report on the Lauren Jackson Sports Centre draft master and business plans be prepared following the completion of the consultation. Thanks.
And Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, I'd like to second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I have a question for Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. I'm wondering if there might be potential government funding, New South Wales government funding, based on the announcement made at the most recent state government budget with reference to cultural and sporting facilities. And I'm wondering if this is part of this in the short to medium term, Mr Chair.
Thank you. Mr Jenkins.
Through you, Mr Chair. There are a number of projects which are about to commence or in the budget in future years, including the replacement of the backboard structures and the LED lighting system that are indicated on page 10. These may be applicable to the funding streams you're talking about. In terms of the master plan and doing business plans, the purpose of doing those is so that in future years we are prepared and ready to have shovel-ready projects should funding be available through those streams.
Happy with that. Councillor King, you had a question?
Yes, similar to Councillor Glacken's question regarding funding. So I've gone through the report and I can't see if anything in the report has actually steered us to external funding, given that this potentially is a regional facility. You've highlighted in the report that there's a number of competitions that come from intrastate and interstate, and that there's potential for an NBL game, and I just would like to see that maybe that there's a state government push to getting some funding for that, or even federal, in regards to a regional development type of strategy.
Mr. Jenkins.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly in terms of the current funding that's available, we're doing assessments of the criteria that's associated with the current funding that's available, and determining which projects from AlburyCity might be suitable to apply for funding for. The whole purpose of, or one of the major purposes of doing the master plan and the business plan, is so that we do have projects that are ready and suitable for either federal or state funding, and in many cases, and that's one of the reasons why we've recommended, for example, going with an external business case for the projects that might be suggested. That way we can show independence in terms of determining the economic benefit that'll be derived from those. But it's important that we do this process in a proper and clear fashion, so that when we do apply for funding, that it's quite clear which that there's a strong business case for them.
You had a follow-up, Councillor King?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to relevant member of staff. Look, I've had a quick read of the report. I think it's a little underdone on the potential that we could have for the Lauren Jackson Centre. I asked Director Ferris regarding the airport as a classic example of something that's been renovated and added to 3 times in the last 10 years, and probably before that. And I think the Lauren Jackson Centre is something that may be following that path. It's been 30 years since there's been since it was built, and there's been a few patch-up jobs. And I'd just like to think that maybe this initiative could be extended to a lot bigger and a lot better, certainly with some regional funding through the federal government and state government. Yes, that's a question or a statement, I don't know.
I'll accept it as seeking information. Mr. Jenkins, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly your comments are noted, and they can be accommodated in the consultation process in terms of I suppose the scale of facility that we consider through this process.
Councillor Doxey, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your indulgence first off, a little preamble. Just following on from Councillor King's comments, I want to follow on with 2 questions. The first question will relate to opportunities for the facility. I know the facility is old. We're throwing some dollars at it. Is this an opportunity to bulldoze it and move to a new site and have an all-seeing, all-dancing sporting complex, possibly based upon the showground area? I'll hear my answer first off. If I can get, then I'll ask a second question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins.
Through you, Mr. Chair. At this stage, through the process we're proposing, we're not looking at changing the location for Lauren Jackson Sports Centre. We are aware that there are likely to be other investigations done at both the showgrounds and the equestrian centre over the next 12 months, hopefully. And we're seeking funding from the Crown at this moment in conjunction with the Showgrounds Trust to undertake a master planning process there. But at this stage, the proposal that we've got before you is to look at the current site, which in past studies has identified that it is reasonably central to a large proportion of the population. It does have a strong regional focus, as Councillor King has already said, and that can be clearly demonstrated from past use. And it does have a lot of attributes, including the fact that it's on operational land, there's room for expansion, and it's associated with other sports facilities, does mean that it does have a lot of good synergies for future sporting centres of excellence or the like.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Councillor Doxey had another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Jenkins, for your reply. In a perfect world, it would be nice to have a new facility. And I'm still thinking along the lines that the Albury Showground in the future would be the ideal spot. It's central, and then we could add on, in a more perfect world, we could add on to an aquatic centre on the side of that and make that the sporting hub for Albury. I guess my question would be, will the consultant lock us into one site and one set of repairs to the current Lauren Jackson Centre only, or is there some flexibility, please?
Mr. Jenkins.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly what we're proposing in this report, unless we're advised otherwise by council, is that we would be investigating this site for future development opportunities. But in the future, through the master plan study at the showground site, there is opportunities to look at alternatives there. But at this stage, the showgrounds has its own charter and its own responsibilities, and we have as a council, we do not have the right to interfere in that. We're happy to work with them in development of their master plan, but at this stage, there's no proposal to relocate any facilities to that location.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. Councillor Vanderman, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Noting that this is a significant project that we're embarking on the basis of the decisions that have been made over the last month or so as far as the aquatic facility is concerned. I note in the stakeholder engagement plan, though, that the budget for the further development of plans and business plans is only $20,000 for both the Lauren Jackson Sports Centre and the Lavington Sports Ground. Now, I'm not sure whether the Lavington Sports Ground should be there, but I still think that the $20,000 is grossly inadequate for the sorts of development of plans and business plans that we're seeking to do through the stakeholder engagement plan, on the basis of past experience with similar and smaller facilities, e.g. the JC King facility with the new building, the clubhouse, if you want to term it as that. So are we able to look at that and come back with what might be a more adequate number, and assuming that that's the 2017-18 Leisure Facilities Management budget, not as printed there. But so that's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Zachnich. Sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, for the question, Councillor Vandervan. We'll certainly take that on notice when we come back with the results of the stakeholder survey. We'll certainly update council on the cost of those studies to be undertaken. Bear in mind they are draft master plan and business planning, some of which we'll be doing in-house.
I have another question for Councillor King.
Yes, to the member of staff. Given that there's been a bit of appetite for something a lot bigger and more conducive to the growing Albury-Wodonga region, do you think we should be progressing with what is in this request for a report, or actually looking at something that we've mentioned tonight about it being, again, a bit bigger, a bit more able to cater for growing tourism, growing residential population, and not just put this money to something that's, again, I think just a tack on to something else, that we should maybe turf it all and start again.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr. Chair. Can I suggest we wait to see what the stakeholder feedback is, and then based on council's committee's input this evening, we can factor some of those suggestions in the report that comes back to council, noting that there's probably 3 master planning processes at 3 different locations that'll probably occur around the same time. One of those locations is not in council ownership. We need to bear that in mind. The other two are, or council is, or is trustee for. So certainly that can happen, but let's take a couple of steps to get that information back to you once the stakeholders respond to council's invitation to comment.
Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Having a look at all the sports that are going to be consulted around this stakeholder engagement plan, do we have some evidence about which of those sports are dead and dying and which ones are growing? Because I think that's one of the biggest issues, is to identify those sports which are perhaps on the decline as far as participation is concerned, and whatever the reason might be. And anecdotally, the reason that some people are dropping sport at the Lauren Jackson is, regardless of what we try and do as far as the costs are concerned, it's perceived to be expensive to participate. But I think it's important to understand and to give weight to those sports that are in a growth phase, more so than those that might be in decline. Is that something that's been factored into the stakeholder engagement plan?
Mr. Jenkins.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and some of that work has already commenced in that the staff are undertaking analysis of the previous usage trends of the Lauren Jackson Sports Centre. We're also looking at national trends for all of the sports that currently use the Sports Centre and other potential users of the Sports Centre. And that will be factored into the evaluation and business planning.
Thank you. Councillor Mack, do you wish to debate this matter?
I'd have to open and close the debate. If there are no more questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Just in relation to this report, and as the chair of the Alex Park Committee and recently the deputy chair to Councillor Vanderven at the last Lauren Jackson Stadium meeting, there's a lot of discussion about this draft plan and certainly the consultation surrounding it. We had a consultation in 2007, according to the report, and certainly there were recommendations of that report that haven't in any way been implemented. And I think there's a significant dollar attached to that. I think I agree with Councillor Vanderven that the general discussion around the table is what sports are using the facility and where can we best have a commercial advantage over other opportunities. But I think first and foremost, there are things in that stadium that need repair or need replacement. And I think it's noted in the report that the portable seating is probably built in the 90s and is an OH&S issue. And certainly dragging it in and out of the show court that currently exists causes damage to the parquetry flooring. So I think, all things being considered, there are some priorities in here, and as a councillor group in the next budget, we'll have to consider what they look like from the report and the feedback from the stakeholders. That numbers are diminishing across all sports in terms of the community. It's just not a cost of entering Lauren Jackson Stadium. I think it's a cost of insurance and a lot of other associated factors. But what we have here is a 30-year-old stadium. So let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. I can't see knocking down a 30-year-old stadium would justify the cost and certainly the replacement of it at the showgrounds. I think we've got to make use of what we've got. It is a great stadium, and it's been complimented on by many visiting teams, especially the Country Cup basketballers, who are very happy with the new air conditioning this year. And certainly we've put a lot of money into photovoltaics and improving what's currently there. So I think we need to sort of take five and consider what this report can provide us with and prioritise the things, listening to the stakeholders and what they or their expectations should be moving into the future. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mack. I have no other questions or comments, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? The motion is carried. I have no reports, officers or delegates reports, no urgent business, no confidential matters, so I declare the meeting closed at 6:20. And very swiftly move on, since I don't have to change chairs, to the Finance and Administration Committee meeting, and welcome to that. This committee meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the committee meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this committee meeting, that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this committee meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair, there are none. Apologies. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. To move that the committee receive and note and accept the apology of committee member Councillor Con and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Happy to second that, Mr Chair.
Thank you. I'll put that motion. All in favour? On the contrary, the motion is carried. FAC 4, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Vandervan.
Mr Chair, I'll move that the committee recommends to Council the minutes of the Finance and Administration Committee meeting held on Monday the 19th of June 2017 at 7:12 p.m. be adopted.
And Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, I'd like to second that, Mr Chair.
I have no questions or comments, so I'll put the motion. All in favour? On the contrary, the motion is carried. FAC 5, matters arising. There are no indications of matters arising. I'll move on to 6. There are no reports from committees and working parties. FAC 7, officers' reports for consideration. Tender, labour hire service. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, Mr Chair. To move the recommendation as printed, that the committee recommends to Council that Council accepts the tenders from Staff Power, Drake, Hayes and Spinifex in order to establish the panel of suppliers to meet the requirements of labour hire tender FIL 17/00344.
And Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr Chair, I'd like to second that.
I don't have any questions. Councillor Glacken, do you want to speak to the motion?
Just very briefly, Mr Chair. This is a great concept because it will enable Council to fill the short-term vacancies as they come up very quickly and efficiently. And it's important to note that it will create efficiencies within the organisation. So that means that there will be, again, savings of time, but also resources for future benefit for the community. So thank you, Mr Chair.
I do have a question from Councillor Mack.
Just one question through you, Mr Chair, to the appropriate staff member. It's just something I've been wondering about for quite some time in relation to our hiring and employment of staff. Is it a lot of other councils do use an independent from another organisation sit in as that independent body and a peak body. If it was an engineering issue, they'd have someone that was working in civil engineering as an independent in the civilian or the community. Is there ever been this consideration of this council to consider that, to have that transparency and independence when we employ and employ new staff?
Mr Zackridge.
Thanks for the question, through Mr Chair. Yes, that is the case, Councillor Mack. Not on all interviews, but certainly where there's representation or input into that service provision from that proposed position, we'd seek to include an independent person on the assessment panel.
Thank you.
Councillor King, you have a question?
Yeah, question to the relevant member of staff, through you, Mr Chair. I don't know whether it's relevant or not, but when does a person from a labour hire company reach a tipping point when we consider that job potentially is full-time? Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Chair. So the situation is that the
These labour hire positions specifically are to fill very short-term or immediate need roles. We do have separately a casual pool, which I think is what you're referring to. So these allocation of positions, very short-term or immediate need term positions with a specified term that begins and ends at a specified time. So these are labour hire positions over and above our normal casual FTE of around 22, 23 positions at present.
Follow-up question to you, through you, Mr. Chair. So do you have a number? 3 months, month, 6 months?
Well, there is no period. It will vary depending on the job we're after to be completed, and that's specified in the engagement allocation. So these aren't positions that would be converted to full-time positions at any point in time. That's not the purpose of these roles. Where we do review positions in terms of potential for future resourcing on a permanent basis, that's a separate process we go through, but not one that's generated by access to the labour hire casual pool of people.
Councillor Gacken, sorry, I have another question from Councillor Vandervan.
Perhaps if I could ask the question through you, Mr. Chair, would it be possible for council staff to provide us with some information on an average term for labour hire individuals, and perhaps the longest term that one was hired for over the last 2 or 3 years, just to get some idea of the number of days or hours that we might look at on an individual contract basis?
We can too. We'll circulate that to councillors after the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Councillor Gacken, do you wish to speak again to your motion?
I don't wish to confuse the issue any further. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll put the motion. All in favour? On the contrary, the motion is carried. FAC 8, investment balances June 2017. Councillor Vandervan.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that the committee recommends the council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of June 2017.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Mr. Chair, I'll second that.
I have no questions. Do you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Vandervan?
Immediately, obviously, it must be rates time.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. I have no other questions. I'll put the motion. All in favour? On the contrary, the motion is carried. I have no delegates' reports, no urgent business and no confidential matters, so I'll declare the meeting closed at 6:27.